I wanted to start by thank you for coming and introduce myself. My name is Steve Sashihara. I am the founder and CEO of a 80-person consulting firm. We're based in Princeton, New Jersey, with offices in New York. And I'm a very enthusiastic supporter of Informs on the practitioner side, which is why I'm here in this session. I have no academic training in optimization OR, but I've spent my whole life, the last 30 years, building the hope that what we are now calling analytics would become a front topic, and I'm really happy that I think that the time's coming. I've written a management book with McGraw-Hill. It's for sale in the stand, and I'm basically pitching it because I did this sort of in response to a dare. When you are a consultant, you tend to clutch a lot of your stuff pretty close to your breast, as opposed to academia, which for those of you in the room that are academics, you know that basically the trade-off is you have to publish all your intellectual property, but in exchange for that, you may move ahead. For consulting firms, it's almost the opposite. That's why most of our websites almost have no content in them, because they're very cagey about what they think or how they think. It's just all kind of brochureware. So the challenge was, how much would you be willing to share and put out? And at first I wrote something that tried to show how smart I was and all this stuff we knew and things. And then when my editor looked at that first version of the book, they said, this is almost completely unreadable and no one's going to buy this. And so we regrouped and they said, what we really need is a book that you can give to executives that explains what optimization is. And ideally full of stories. And at first I thought, okay, that's no problem, right? Storytelling, that made sense to me. But then what I realized, and this is what my editor told me, was stories are not of the form, this poor company, this poor executive was in a miserable way, and then they got fill in blank, optimization, Princeton consultants, whatever, and suddenly things were fantastic. They said, that is not a story. That is an advertisement. A story has characters. They have drama. They have, misery and then happiness and false hopes. And I was thinking of all our projects, said, yes, all of our projects have those activities. The good guys don't always win. The bad guys don't always lose. There are times when you want to give up, and the only reason you plug ahead is not because you've got this vision, it's because you just keep plugging ahead because, I don't want to get fired. And so I thought we could tell a lot of those stories. I just want to share with any of you here that are thinking of writing a book, and I know that some of you in this room have, that that storytelling aspect is a lot harder to write than it is to read. So if you read my book and think, this isn't so great, well, it was pretty hard to write, so I put what I could in it. But I'd like to extract some of the things. I have a couple slides where that's from a presentation where I give to executives about what optimization is. But I'd like to really spend the time here talking about what we think is optimization for the practitioners. Let's see. So, with your indulgence, a couple slides that we use for executives. We start by asking rhetorically this question: what's the most important product the organization produces? Now, in most of the sessions that we give, we're in a room and everyone in the room works for the same company. So it seems kind of rhetorical. But in a room like this, where it's a mixed audience, I would still say, whether you are working in a company, whether you're in an academic institution, whether you're not-for-profit, what's the most important product your company produces? And the answer that I'm going to use comes from a Nobel Prize-winning economist named Dan Kahneman, and I use him a lot. People often mistakenly introduce him as a Princeton professor of economics because he won the Nobel in economics. He's actually a psychology professor. And I'll talk a little bit more about him. But after writing the usual sorts of highly academic books that one writes to win a Nobel, he then moved over and started writing books for business people and normal people. And I got this from a YouTube interview he did with McKinsey, where he's sitting on a stool and they're just asking him questions. And he says, I think that the most important product any company can produce, any organization, are the decisions it makes. So he said, think of a company as a factory of decisions. He took that in a certain trajectory, and I'll take it in a slightly different trajectory, but his trajectory, just to give him his due, and I'm probably a poor summarizer of the way he's thinking, but he said, we've spent a whole half century working on total quality, Six Sigma, lean, all these manufacturing techniques for manufacturing physical products out of our factories. We don't seem to have spent much time using the same techniques on decision making that comes out of our companies. They seem to be fairly haphazard. And I love that for obvious reasons, I think, to everyone in this room. So that's where I kind of took that as a launching point. So I just want to ask, why are decisions the most important byproduct of any company? Well, it's because decisions drive performance. Now, decisions aren't the sole determinant of performance. And I want to talk a little bit later about that, but they're the things that we can control. A lot of things that will ultimately determine the performance of an organization have things that have almost nothing to do with things that they have under control. Macroeconomic factors, factors by other actors, scientific discoveries, but the thing that we can control are our decisions. And I think it's in the water, it's in the air, it's in the news. Everyone's talking about this. We want to become more data-driven. And we're talking about analytics, et cetera. We want to become more data-driven. Well, of course we want to become more data-driven. We don't want to rule our highly rational businesses with our guts or instincts. That makes a lot of sense. But actually, we don't really make decisions with data. We make decisions with information. And that may seem like a slightly different, just a slight little nuance, but it's actually a pretty important difference. But I want to say, before I fill in the little blank, what Dan Kahneman got his Nobel Prize for doing was taking a rigorous approach and showing experimentally what a lot of us would know as just commonsensically. That is, not only are people biased, but the biases that we operate under as human beings, the way we're wired, we have systematic biases over and over again. And what he did was he took some of these names, I guess he might have invented, others he just took out of the literature, but he created experiments that demonstrated, to the satisfaction of the Nobel Prize Committee, a satisfaction that one could catalog and quantify and show these biases. So even when we present people with information, they can still systematically make the wrong decisions through biases. So some of the biases, I've listed a couple that he uses. One he calls anchoring bias. I see some nodding heads. A lot of people here know this and probably could teach this. Anchoring biases are the tendency to use some information and weight it more heavily than others. A lot of what people do, one of our natural instincts is to weight the first information we get, to anchor that more than others. So the illustration he gave, he said, as a psych professor, I give essay questions, and I give 5 questions, and I found that if the person really nails the first question, does a great job, I'm more inclined to score highly their second and third and fourth question. So he suggests, what you should do if you're a professor, if you're grading, you should grade everyone's first question, then come back and do the second. But the point I'm going with it is, that's anchoring bias. Your score on the second should have nothing to do with the first, but it's a natural human tendency. Another is confirmation bias. We see that a lot in corporations. Confirmation bias is to get lots of data, some that are in favor of the proposition, some that are against, some that say we can't tell, but to put a little bit more weight in things that confirm what you thought coming in. Now, another one is bandwagon bias. That's the notion, and sometimes we'll actually see that in books, the wisdom of fools, of groups, of crowds. But in hard science, you would say the fact that 10,000 people believe this doesn't make the petri dish change. It's either it's a fact of nature or not. But there is a bandwagon bias, and when he gave an example of this, my small company, we changed the way we did recruiting. So what he said was, and this is what we're doing, everyone interviews the candidate, then you meet in this room, and you go around the room, and everyone says what they think. They said that will create a bandwagon bias. So what he suggested we do is we said, anyone who wants to do this, everyone write down on a card their vote. So if it's a 1 to 5 scale, right, 1, 2, 4, 5, and then everyone flash at the same time. And then then you can discuss. But just that helps you from having the first person say, I thought they were terrible, and the second person, I kind of agree. By the time it gets around to you, it's a bandwagon bias. So if you're the only one that flashes, they look really good, it kind of nerves you up to say, well, I recognize that I can see I'm only 5 here, but let me give you my viewpoint. So one thing I like about Kahneman is he really has a really good way of explaining that even with information, we sometimes make the wrong decisions. A couple others, and I'll move on. One is called outcome bias, and I love this, and I see this all the time in corporate America. Outcome bias is a bias that the outcome really justifies the decision. And as I started with, a lot of things that happen to us, we have some control over, but not a lot of control over. So you'll often hear in business, I bet a lot of you have, at the end of the day, bottom line, blah happened. So that must mean the decision was good. It may be a terrible decision. It may have succeeded despite the decision, but outcome bias is that. And my favorite last one is bias blind spot. Bias blind spot is, while this is true of others, it is not true of myself. So other people are irrational and have biases, but economists, right, this is something that's basically baked into our human psyche. It's not so different than attribution bias, which is when I do something wrong, it's because I had a bad day, I made a mistake, I'm grumpy. But when someone else does something bad, it's because of who they are. They are evil, they are bad, they are no good. But I can have bad days, but they are evil. So that's so anyhow, what really turns data into information, and what we're here selling today and celebrating is analytics and optimization. I like this. I like this one page diagram of what is analytics and optimization, and it's the evolution of data from basically huddled over with your standard reports all the way up through the wonderful world of optimization. As you know, the Inform's view of this is that there's really 3 levels. So the light green would be descriptive, the darker green would be predictive, and the top would be prescriptive, as in a prescription. I often ask our people, I say, let's stop, even though we're big optimization people, let's stop for a second and think. If you could predict the future, wouldn't that be good enough? I mean, do we really need optimization? And in fact, a lot of our clients say essentially the same thing. They say, we'll get to optimization someday, but I mean, we'd be happy if we could just get our forecast halfway decent. Honest to God, you guys are way up there, and I've heard you have all these fancy clients, but we're just down here. But the funny thing is, if I told you, and I won't, the people who are saying that, you would think, wow, they're like some of the best known companies on earth. But everyone thinks they're in the same position, which is, yeah, I know that other people have this fantastic, they've got ERP out the wazoo and everything's hooked up and they've got databases, but we're struggling just to kind of make the numbers add together and get people not to try to game the system, But the funny thing, it's like one of Kahneman's biases. It's like everyone thinks that that's their particular dilemma, but that others, better funded others or more, written up others have better things. But yeah, so this presentation is about optimization. I like to now go to the practitioner part. So this is, thanks for indulging, this is a little bit of what we talked about executives, but I'd like to talk to people, I presume I represent in this room, who do this for a living. I have 2 sections to go through. One is, what makes a good optimization opportunity? So you go into a company, that's where we go, but it could be a not-for-profit. What makes a good optimization opportunity? And then a second, some tips on taking those opportunities and converting. Okay, so I basically have 5 points on a good optimization opportunity. And I hope you don't mind the corniness, but we arranged them in order so they would spell Homer because we're trying to get something that people can remember. It's sort of an executive trick, but how to hit a home run. I'm sometimes giving talks to people that aren't from the US, and I have to explain to them what a home run is. And I say, I guess the short version is sometimes you get a hit, but the people after you strike out, and so well, that was kind of good. It didn't really help your team. So a home run is a hit that's so great that you guarantee to at least score yourself and maybe the people in front of you. So looking for home runs is a good thing. And a lot of us in life, a lot of our better projects are just hits. They were technically good and they were good for us, but they didn't actually put a point on the board for our team. So what do really constitute the home runs? Okay. Well, first, high value problems. Now, I want to admit to you guys, okay, when I first started, that was 30 years ago, when I first started, this seemed so painfully obvious. This is not something I thought about at all. So we were working as a tiny little consulting firm, working for a pharmaceutical company. And someone came to me and said, hey, we take 40 study drugs and we assign them to 2. We have a therapeutic drug and we have placebo. And we mix them up to the patients and we give them. You know, the person that did this, I don't think they wrote a good randomization routine. Can you look at it? And I was like, yes, because I had taken a course in this. So when I looked, I was, aha, this is bogus. This, you know, I could do great randomization. And I spent like a couple weeks on it. I'm a little embarrassed to tell the story, but if it goes for good. So I spent a couple time. It doesn't matter. It wasn't like giving all one drug to the one pot. It was just a kind of a primitive one. But I was really into, oh, this could be cracked. Well, it's like 40 random numbers. And but I was so thrilled to be able to show whatever this code, how smart I was. But it wasn't a high value problem. What we figured out later was that the high value problem was how to get this stuff through a study, through to the FDA as fast as possible. And you could quantify that by saying the patent life for this drug starts when you start the filing process. And you get like a 20-year patent. But it starts from when you start the filing process, not when you get approved. So every day you're marching, trying to get the thing approved, is cutting into your patent life. But also, if it turns out this is a no good Nick drug, well, bailing quickly is a good thing. So anyhow, so we found that's a real high value problem. So one thing that I think is true of outside consultants like us versus inside consultants, which some of you may be, we're less afflicted by this problem, not because we're smarter, but because people have to pay us, you know, huge amounts by the hour. So there's not a tendency to assign us to things that someone can't do a business case or cost justification someplace, particularly in economies where people aren't exactly throwing money around, which I would think would describe this one. Whereas in-house people often have someone amble up to them and say, hey, can you help me with this? Like, hey, can you check into this? We did this last year, and someone just asked the question, and can you analyze this and see whether there's a better way? But maybe it's not a very high value problem. So, I would say the first attribute is to look for a high value problem. Now, where do we look for high value problems? Well, the first thing I would say is, where is the organization spending a lot of money? So if we say this is an algorithm for scheduling staff, so it's for scheduling trucks or nurses. Well, do they have 5 trucks, 3 nurses? It's not going to be a very high value problem. If they have 10,000 or 20,000, you think like bonanza. This could be really, really a big thing. A second is, a lot of time management will say, there may be a lot of potential high value problems around, but our company culture is, we tend to focus on one thing at a time, one initiative at a time. So asking what the initiative that's coming is, not what the one they're in the middle of, but what's the next thing that they really want to get on, gives us as consultants, but everyone here that has time to kind of get some data, try to put together some proof of concept and say, when you start to think about this, I've got some stuff to show you, because I think there might be some promising ways around this that aren't merely just, you know, line up the usual suspects, buy a software package or hire a consultant or something, but maybe there's an analytics way of doing this. The second is, I think if we're looking for great opportunities, we should look for opportunities that have objective measurement. Now, I want to say just a couple things. The first, I think, is kind of obvious, and is, you know, what we do for a living is we turn everything into numbers. So the more that you have a strong hunch that this is going to really fight being turned into a number, the harder your job's going to be. Okay. Now that might, I would say that's a little obvious. Okay. Let me say something that in my mind is less obvious, or maybe it's just less obvious to me. Okay. A lot of the great stuff is framing the problem in such a way that what seems to be not quantifiable can be quantifiable. And that's where a lot of great stuff that we take for granted now in analytics has come from. So for example, what's something that would be hard to turn into a numerical score that would be worth the effort? Well, I often see, sometimes when they're teaching OR or something, they use the example, what restaurant should we eat at tonight? There's 5 people and they're trying to decide what restaurant. They said, this is a multi-objective function and cost and blah, blah, okay. But the thing is, it doesn't really pass the test of being very high value, you know? I mean, if someone's violently allergic to something, that'll probably shunt everything. And secondly, I'm really struggling to see, I mean, notwithstanding the fact that you can create these little multi-objective things, I'm struggling to see how that turns into numbers really easily, you know? But another preference that people have recently had fantastic luck with is, suppose I show you an ad, and I say, how interesting or relevant or compelling is that to you? It's like, measuring that, you know, turning that to a number, that's, I mean, you'd have to get in their head with some kind of a brainiac wave or something. I don't see it happening. But you could say, well, if you give them ads and they click it, you know, so let's measure the propensity to click through. Well, that's very measurable.
particularly when you're throwing up thousands and thousands. So the only point I want to make here is that, yeah, it is a lot easier to look for things that we can turn into numbers, but don't be thwarted too quickly, because a lot of the smartest stuff that happens is taking something that other people have framed in such a way that it can't be easily turned into a number, and turning it into something that, oh, I can quantify that, but it's not the same thing. Okay, so whether they like it or not, they did click it. You know, that's something we can quantify. Okay. I like optimization projects where what we'll be doing has multiple trials. In other words, we can keep trying it over and over again. Honestly, when you hear an Edelman presentation or when people write books, they will often use examples that are save the company strategic, big one-time decisions. Should we merge with this company? How can we best reorganize? You know, and I'm not saying that that stuff doesn't work, but I'm just saying it's much easier to go after decisions when you're looking for homers, where there are the repetitive decisions over and over again. It allows you to work on the model to improve it. So when, for example, you're putting together a portfolio, it's much easier to do high-frequency finance, where you're buying stocks over and over and over again, than for a fund manager that does a buy and hold and buys stocks every few months. So he says, okay, you know, Informs member, write me a model that will tell me what portfolio I should have right now. You know, that's a pretty tough problem. Okay, even in good times, it's a pretty tough problem. But he said, okay, every hour, I want you to make a prediction of a stock that you buy, and then and or sell. There are a lot of trials there. That's a much easier problem. Incidentally, because you know we do some of this, the notion that high frequency finance is harder. Well, from what we do, it's actually it's a little bit easier because it's got these multiple trials. You can just keep getting more and more data. And one of the problems with single shots is if you blow the first shot, there is no second shot for you. You know, so the nice thing about repeated is that people put up with a lot more failure until you see little sparks of goodness, and maybe it gets better and better. Okay. What do I mean by even playing field? For us, even playing field means that if you are being asked to compete against the way they're doing it today, that the people that are doing it today don't have costs, don't have data in their head that you're not given on the little you know, USB drive they gave you. Also, an even playing field would mean that people have low controversy over what the costs are and what the objective function is. If that is very controversial, then you're just basically throwing yourself potentially into the ring of combatants. So if your model shows that we should cut taxes to get the economy going, then, oh, you're a Republican. We know where you're coming from, right? But if your model shows that you cut taxes and the economy, you raise taxes and the economy gets better, oh, you must be a Democrat. You know, we know where you're coming from. So, you know, you walk into a place where there is very large amounts of acrimony and disagreement on practically everything. You know, earlier in my career, and I'm not a cynic, but earlier in my career, I didn't see that coming. I thought, but when we come in with the data, and I knew in my own heart, I'm not a combatant. I'm here just to turn the light of reason and math and algorithms on this. But you know, you can see it coming when you're into an area where the people are really just torqued up, and they'll take any fact and any finding and use that to say, oh, you're one of us or you're one of them. And so I like an even playing field. And you know, there's enough opportunities in life that you can find them without having to just drop into the ones that are the most contentious. Rewards for everyone. Usually when we think of what we're trying to do, we're thinking of, if you're in corporate America, the cliches you probably know is the shareholder. We're trying to make more profits for the shareholder. More locally, whoever sponsored us, whoever came over and said, hey, consulting firm, come in here, or whoever tapped your cube and said, hey, can you help us with this, okay? But there are a lot more people that should be rewarded. And I'm not saying that in all circumstances this happens. I'm just saying if you're looking for great opportunities, look for opportunities where there's a lot of reward to go around. So for example, what's in for the users? So right now the users are doing things in their head, doing things by hand. Is what you're doing going to make their lives better? Well, if you can do it, will they think, oh no, you're putting me out of a job, or you're trying to make me look stupid? Or would they say, wow, you know, if you could do that, that would be sweet. But I'm a little skeptical on whether you can do it. But if you could do that, man, that would just make my life so much easier, and that would help everywhere. That smells like a win, So I also would look for environments where, I don't want to sound selfish, so I'd like to lead with this. And trail with it rather than lead with it. But what's in it for you? So if you do this for them, are you going to get the credit? Are you going to allow to publish? One of the problems I have with my book is that some of the times, some of the cases we want to use, the company said, and this was their right, but their company said, that's competitive advantage. Why would we put that up? Why should I go to an Edelman conference and tell everyone what we did and how much we made, and my competitor can hear about that? Hey, you got your salary, consultant, you got paid. I don't see any need for you to publish. But so in an environment where people will either negotiate that and say, yeah, I agree. If you save us $10 billion, we'll let you write your little paper as long as it gets through legal. Or they're actually an environment, and some are, where they basically like to publish and tell what they're doing. That's their corporate view. Google, I would say, is like that. Then that has the attributes of a win. Okay, I have 7 tips I'd like to go through, and I'll go through them quickly. Okay. The human in the loop. Okay, I'm not the person that invented this. You're not the first time hearing it, but I want to say that I wish, and at the possibility of redundancy, if there's anyone in this room that this is helpful to, then I want to ask indulgence of everyone else. I wish someone had told me, with this amount of passion in the beginning of my career, Steve, there are 2 kinds of optimization problems. One is a human-in-the-loop problem, and the other, what's called a black box problem. Okay? Because we were only taught one way of doing things, which is the black box. You got all this data, you got these algorithms, you got an objective function, you got constraints, you solved it, out came the answer. Okay? But what I found out as soon as I went to work, my first problem, and ever since, is that in my lifetime, in our generation, it's probably the case that a person is doing this right now, and you are providing them with a tool. And for the first 5 or 6 or 7 iterations, which may be the first 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years, it's still their responsibility to make this decision. And so your tool is supposed to help them make a better decision, but at the end of the day, they're still making a decision. That is the human-in-the-loop problem, okay? So what are some of the dilemmas, okay? Well, some of the dilemmas, if you frame it that way, and you could probably think of better ones than me, but if you think of it that way, it's like, how do you convince the human being that this is a better decision, okay? Now, consider, if all the thing does is make a decision like the human being would make, so-called artificial intelligence, you're not improving the decision. You may be able to do it, that's automation, but that's not optimization. So if you come up with this wacky new combination that no human being has come up with, that's counterintuitive to them. It's also not that easy to have them look at the math. Another dilemma is, often our stuff goes off the rails, not because we picked the wrong algorithm. It's because the data suck. And it could be one little piece of data that sucks, that blows the whole thing, but more likely it's suckitude that is spread all throughout your data sets. So that's a problem, because the user's saying, you know what? All I heard you say was you can do a better job than me, and all I'm looking at the screen, and this is colossally wrong. In fact, suppose I didn't show up for work today and you just did this and pushed the button on this, do you know what would have happened? Planes would have fallen out of the sky, customers would have, like, oh my God, oh my God. So there are a lot of dilemmas to the human loop problem, and I have to say that a lot of my last 5 years, last 8 years, is trying to face this problem square on. For most of my career, we've squirmed around it. We've succeeded when we can, but for the last 5 years, I've been thinking, this is actually a real definable problem. How do you work with a human in the loop and succeed? Well, so one thing you can do is live with the users, okay? Now, I'm not going to give you a case of ours. I'd like to give you a case of a friend's, but I didn't get this permission. But they have a very, very large transportation network that has a large decentralization component to it. So they got permission, this is their OR group, they got permission to take over one of the facilities where they basically hung there and they watched people using their optimization stuff, and they essentially had the rights to order people to use it, but they chose not to do that. But they live with them very intimately. And one of the great things about that, versus staying in your lab, or in your office, back in your conference room, is you get to see what the real world is really doing with your model and how they really make the decisions. I think it's just a fantastic way to do things. I also want to say, it's not just a data collection technique. They also get to know you. They get to, if you really have respect for them, they can pick that up and they can say, okay, so you don't think you're smarter than we are, you don't think that you've got this little algorithm, but you really want to help us, and I'm picking that up. It takes a while to do that, but living with them, yeah, it is a data collection technique, but also helps them build trust in you. Another thing that a lot of us of a certain age, i.e. older, know is the thing where you take all the data sets and you run a model and you save them $10 trillion in one go. That never works. I mean, it rarely works. It never works. I mean, it's impossible. It's like trying to keep everyone in a city happy in one night. It's not possible. There's too many moving parts. So it is a fantastic thing and not a trivial thing to find the first place to go. So I had these steps, and I said, you know what? They can just step over it. But it'd probably be a nice thing to have a step there. I mean, that would be a nice thing, particularly at night. Finding the little chink where they'll welcome you. Boy, is that valuable. And you know what will never show you that? The data. The data don't show you that. You have to actually kind of hang with them. You can ask people. You can plead with them. But if you can find that first little place that you can insert and show a win, then you can build on that. You can build on that. That's just a wonderful thing. Okay. Another thing that we still today, I will admit, do wrong, but we try not to, is when people are turfing out the project, they will tell us, okay, this is IT's job, or this is finance's job. You'll get the data from them. They're the canonical source of data, okay? So, and once a full disclosure, we do that today sometimes. But whenever we do, we are rolling the dice, and it is probably a mistake. And if it blows up, we will not be able to say, well, it wasn't our data. All we'll know is that's a failed project, okay? So more and more we want to say, we want to have as much control over the snapshot of the data as possible, and we want to be fully accountable for cleaning. We want that to be in our scope. We believe, and I'm going to talk about this when I talk about black boxes, that the cleaning the data with the users is not just valuable, it is essential to make an optimization model work. And so if you say, look, all my job is take data from them and give it to the user, okay, you're using this data in a way that the data was never intended to be used. It's not been cleaned to do what you're doing with it. They cleaned it for other reasons. So if you really are walking into the place with new technology like optimization, the data has not been scrubbed to do what you're doing with it. You're the first person doing it. So it's always going to show problems with it. Okay, black boxes. Well, whenever anyone says black box, that's always bad. And so, unsurprisingly, I'm not a big fan of black boxes either. But let me just ask rhetorically. So I've heard this presentation a few times where people say, if you want to communicate to an executive, you've got to show people the decision in the way that the executive understands. And if it's a non-technical executive, don't show them lots of math and things like that, okay? Well, I still am curious when I hear someone say that. Do you mean that you want us to take analytic methods that are like the way people solve problems? A very, very common way to solve problems is with a decision tree. Now, there are people out there selling decision tree software. I'm not saying decision trees are bad. There are a lot of times when it's good, but it is often the wrong way of solving a problem. It simplifies it down to a cartoon set of once-only choices. It's very, very bad, and it's very difficult to show someone an LP. There's only so much clip art and lines you can draw, but it's hard to visualize it. So am I supposed to dumb down my stuff to get rid of, quote, the black boxes and do something like a decision tree where an LP really should have solved it? Or what am I supposed to do here? Well, let me give you my answer, okay? Shrink the black box at least. So at the very heart, there's going to be this LP. At least all the other stuff around it doesn't have to be opaque. So most black box opaqueness is, okay, I got the data from this group. I wrote algorithms that you'd never understand. I programmed all this code, you don't read code, and I'm going to give you a screen, here's your result. What do you think of it, right? There's a lot of blackness. So what we think is, at least show them the data. You're like, here's the data that we're using. So if you don't like the right side, let's flip over the screen. Like, why isn't it assigning this to any of our drivers? Well, let's see. It doesn't think you have any drivers. It thinks they're all off shift. Well, that's obviously wrong. Take a look out the window. Well, so if you also allow them to edit that, or you can sit by them and edit quickly, you don't have to cycle back and say, okay, we'll be back next week once we've cleaned it. If they can just fix it right there, we can say, let's recycle. Like, suddenly it's lit up a bunch of drivers and now it's assigned. Excellent, excellent, okay? So you can help on the data. Another thing is, and I want to credit, I don't know how many of you know Professor Warren Powell at Princeton. I often, particularly early in my career, we would go and do projects together, and I viewed myself as the MBA type, and he was the PhD type. So I expected him to be the math guy, and I was to be the executive guy. And I want to give you this tip. It's one of the wisest things I've ever heard. It came from him, and it placed in the back, in reverse, okay? He said, a lot of times when someone says, we were selling linear and mixed integer programs to assigned fleets, okay? And he said, I said, yeah, this is impossible because sometimes the reason this is the best solution is this. It's all these ply and all these dimensions. He said, Steve, this is a pretty good network. So the optimal decision, what they're doing, they're not that far apart. It's not like someone's going to look at it and say, this is, he said, what people will ask you over and over again, his experience is not why you did this, but why you didn't do that. So you assigned to this truck. Why didn't you just give it to this one? He's a lot closer. Okay? So what we learned to do is we have screens where we show what did the model even consider was feasible. So why didn't you even consider this driver? Well, because you didn't have hours of service, or another data error, or it was a bogus constraint. But that was very wise, and I hope I can convey that to you as a tip. It's like, don't just show me what why this is the highest scoring solution. Show me what you considered. Why didn't you even consider these things? So in all ways, when we're working, we don't believe we can completely eliminate the black box, but we're always trying to shrink it. There's always ways to get it smaller. I'll also say that from a process point of view, if your user is with you, and you can get this in the pilot as you're building, they will see the house being framed. They'll see the plumbing coming in. They'll see the electric. They'll see the inspector come back 12 times, and they're starting to get more of a feeling of what's inside this thing they just bought. And they realize, geez, every time we do that, we get a 2-week delay. So I'm pretty good to understand that we're not going to get that perfect. It's good enough. So that kind of puts some light into the black box. Okay. I strongly believe that there are some projects that we've done in the past, and the reason we were successful was not because we were so fabulous. The reason we were successful is because we got hired by the right people. It's like having the right parents. So sometimes your sponsor is, and let me just say this lovingly, is of the school that a lot of IT people are from, which is if you plan out a 5-year project, you get all the requirements written down, you cast them in stone, you do all this design, you put all these things together, and then you run this fantastically tight project. That works in large-scale construction projects, of which software, traditional application software, is one. There's not a lot of difference between building a large apartment complex out of steel and concrete and building that in C++ or Java. But in what we do, it's often very iterative, and everyone here in this room that has done this knows that. It's more researchy. It is not pure research, but it has a very, very strong research component to it. And if you get a sponsor that will give you a reasonable compromise, unless you are in pure research in academia, rarely will someone just give you dough and say, I know it's research, whatever you come back with, I'm good for it. They want some promises. They want some deadlines. They want some schedules. But to the extent you've got a good sponsor, they're going to give you a break. They're going to say, I know there's some research here, but let's communicate a minimum win here. And anything you give me over that is all gain. But if you don't achieve the minimum, well, then you're toast. Okay, but you don't need to lay out for certitude everything you're going to deliver to me, which is, I think that's what I was trying to say, is the dilemma is, I may over-deliver, but if you are in the construction mentality, more is less. I want to know what I'm getting. So if I said I want a 2x2 window, a 3x3 window isn't better, it's different, it's wrong. I want a 2x2 window, and our stuff generally doesn't resolve itself to show me exactly what I'm going to get ahead of time, but we can maybe get a minimum, and I think a sponsor that is willing to do that for us is great. I also like a sponsor that's willing to put their own personal capital in their organization behind a project they believe in. That's pretty valuable. Okay, my last slide. I'm in another group, and a lot of the people are saying, so if you have an in-house analytics group, what's the best way to organize it? One theory is that we cluster people together into a department, an analytics department. The other is that we disperse them through the business units, and maybe we collect them for like a centers of excellence, that sort of thing. I am an outsider. I run a consulting firm, but so let me give you my impression, my view is I like having people collected. So, and that's how consulting firms work. All of us do one thing, we do analytics. However, We spend 2, 3, 4 days a week at our clients staring at the rock face out there in the field. But when we come back, that's how we share best practice. So my view of the Center of Excellence is not everyone's out in the business units and they can come together and kind of share. But for many of us, many of you, many of us, we don't set the organizational structure of our company. So you kind of live with what you got. So if that's the way they have you guys set up, I would say a Center of Excellence, kind of a virtual analytics department, yeah, it's good. But if you said, what do you think is best? What I think is best is actually having everyone in one group and saying, but anything that's happening here is just trying to sharpen your skills and get some coaching. But the real action is out there. Don't let people hang in their cubes and try to solve the client's problem, in their office or in their lab. They've got to get out with the clients. Anyhow, thank you. Thanks for everything. And let me see. I think that we need time for questions. I have time for a couple questions that people have, but I'd like to thank you for coming to my talk. Thanks.